Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Art Alvarez with Mortgage Works, where we have the answers and they're on the house. Welcome to this week's Mortgage Minute, coming to you from Palm Springs and the greater Coachella Valley area. You might recall the last week or two I've been commenting about how we have been having some pretty moderate weather for the low desert here. That's over. I had mentioned before that oftentimes this time of year, we will hit the one teens, and sure enough, maybe I shouldn't have said anything because this week the one teens are back. Yesterday I think we got up to about 114, 113. Today we're forecast to hit about 114 again, and then we are actually going to head into a little bit of a cooling off period if as Jeff just pointed out, 117. So here we are, the one teens are back, and you know what, that's pretty common this time of year in the Coachella Valley. It's really nothing new. It's August, summertime, and we're going to often get into the one teens in this particular part of the country. So, but we're used to it. We know how to handle it. And as I was about to say, we are going to see a little bit of a cooling trend. I think we might get back under the 110 level here going into the weekend and early next week. So not quite sweater weather, but at least off of these pretty high temperatures this week. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into what's going on with the mortgage market and the bond market. First, our rates. I think you're going to be pretty pleased with this rate grid. We updated it this morning, and rates are looking pretty darn good. We're looking at conforming 30-year fixed conventional with a good down payment and decent credit score down to 6.125. The temporary buy downs, 3.25 or 4.25, whether you're doing a 3-2-1 or a 2-1. FHA now down to 5 5/8. True for VA as well. And look at that, 15-year fixed, 5 3/8. Now, obviously, 15-year term, the rate's going to be, the payment's going to be a little bit higher, even with that low rate. But nonetheless, that's a very low rate for those of you who like that shorter amortization period and you can tolerate the payments. And then look at fixed jumbo, same as conforming 30-year fixed at 6.125. And a 7-year jumbo, 7-year fixed arm, down under 6. It's at 5 3/4. So these rates are terrific. A nice little improvement over the last week or so. In fact, Jeff's going to pull up the chart of the 10-year bond yield where you can get an idea and see that's what we like to see. And of course, the big drop was basically going back to beginning of the week. Again, this is a 5-day chart going back to last Friday. And big drop down in the early part of the week, and we've been pretty much flat all week, right in this 4.2 4.25 range. So that's a really nice range where, again, overall we have rate stability, but with a recent trending downwards. And so that's part of the reason why the rates that we just showed you on our website are as good as they are. And so don't let anybody tell you that rates are at 7% or anywhere near that. That's just not the case with most transactions. So what's going on in the financial markets this week to help support where we're at? Well, not a whole lot. Light calendar as far as economic data reports. I thought I would throw out a few here just to give you some basic information, give you an idea of how the economy is doing. Factory orders, it came out beginning of the week, down 4.8% in June. That was attributed to a drop in airplane orders. But yet, here's the thing. Again, headlines, right? This would make you think maybe the economy is weakening, perhaps, but throw out airplane orders, not so bad. And year over year, factory orders are actually up 3.8%. So an annual increase of 3.8% for factory orders, I don't know, where I come from, that would be considered a pretty good number and certainly not indicative of a recession coming anytime soon. The Institute of Supply Management, they do a services index. That index rose to a 7-month high in July, 55.7. Anything over 50 is considered expansionary in terms of the economy. And this sequence of growth each month has extended now for 2.5 years. So remember, the services component of the economy is about 70% of the total. So the the service side of the economy continues to show pretty darn good strength. And the last thing I wanted to mention is the trade deficit. It was narrower in June because of a sharp drop in consumer goods. imports, 60.2 billion, down from 71, almost 72 billion in May. That's a nice 11 billion reduction, and that's actually pointed to as part of the reason we ended up with a pretty darn good 3.0% growth in second quarter GDP. These trade deficit numbers are part of the reason of seeing that kind of rebound. And again, overall, we're having a pretty good economy, at least at this particular time. That was pretty much it as far as any significant data points to even talk about. Next week will be a big week, CPI and PPI, so we'll wait for that. Those can always be a market mover. And if those numbers end up being cool or soft, then who knows? We may see more improvement in that 10-year bond yield and therefore mortgage rates. So given these current conditions, rates being where they are, I thought it's time to revisit seller concessions. We talked about those last week, but I want to kind of cover that again and give you some specific, basically current examples of what we are handling here at Mortgage Works, real life transactions where I can try to show or illustrate why negotiating seller concessions can be a really good option for you as a buyer. So with that, we'll bring Jeff back on and we'll get started.
Hey, Art. I'm a little disappointed you didn't say anything about your Angels. What's going on?
Well, they just, as I keep saying, they just wallow back and forth, get close to 500 and then 2 or 3 or 4 games under 500 and back again. The last couple of days, they've not done so well. So they're going to be, if they finish the year above 500, I'll be surprised. I do not see the playoffs in their future. Not this year.
Wasn't there some trade deadlines or something you were talking about last week? I was just curious if they made any wild trades or they just kind of stand pat.
No, nothing major. They got a couple of pitchers, but no big names or anything. And so overall, the Angels are pretty quiet. I think their challenge is, they've got a good core group of younger players, and they look like they could be the franchise going forward. So I think they decided to kind of hang on to their core group and keep working them, get them more experience, and then focus on 26 as to getting back into the playoffs. So, and then for our star player, he's doing okay, but again, not back to his old self. He did hit a home run yesterday. So really the big excitement for the Angels these days is waiting for Mike Trout to hit that 400 home run threshold. That's going to be the fun part of the season, for the last, what do we got, about a month and a half. So
yeah, I'm excited to talk about today's topic just because it seems like I see more and more things in the headlines and also digging in and, reading past headlines that the market is shifting in many locations from being a seller's market to a buyer's market. And they say that there's more inventory in the market. The inventory that's out there is more days on the market before they sell, which usually says, hey, you know what? It looks like it could favor the borrower or the buyer. And so I'm excited to hear about this because I know we're going to talk about concessions today, but, I kind of, this is a little dramatic. Hey, watch this before you make a decision. I think it is important because, when we've talked in the past, it's easy to forget that there's more than one reason to ask for concessions. And if you missed it last week, go back and look at that program because, you went into it pretty much in depth. But from a buyer standpoint, I'm excited to hear about this today.
Yeah, Jeff, you're right. In fact, it's so interesting. It just happened to be that this morning, the Greater Palm Springs Realtors sent out their latest desert housing report for June, and the numbers were kind of underscore what you just described. Days on market's now about 59. The current sales rate is about 30% below normal. The amount of inventory of homes listed for sale now is just under 5 months of supply based on the current sales rate. That's almost back to normal. Basically the ratio of list price to closing price is now about 96, 97% of list price. So that means you're seeing about a 3 to 4% adjustment in what the home's listed at and what it actually sells for. All that, in my mind, spells big opportunity for prospective home buyers because the market has shifted. They have more leverage, and that's what we're going to get into a little bit today.
Well, before I turn it back over to you on this, I'm just curious, you've said in the past and just recently, and I think it holds very true when people say, well, I'm waiting for those rates to go down to those historic lows. And yet today's news about the rates, they're well below history. What is the rate typically that we see in the marketplace when it comes to mortgage rates? Not the lows, not the highs. What's the average?
Well, I mean, we've actually covered that a few weeks ago. Is if you go back and look at the 50-year average of conforming conventional 30-year fixed rates in the US, the average is over 7%.
Hmm.
So this notion that rates are abnormally high just factually is not accurate. And of course, the media keeps talking about we're near 7% market. That's not accurate either. As we just went over on our rate grid, we're in the very low sixes now, and we're in the mid to high fives on, government loans, FHA, VA. So we are already at a point where historically rates are better than average. And that's a hard concept to grasp when everyone still has this short-term memory of 2 and 3% mortgages from the pandemic, forgetting about the fact that that was a once in 100-year phenomenon that's not going to repeat itself anytime soon. And so those kind of rates were frankly what were not normal. So we're actually back to more of a normalized market on the mortgage rate side, where I think the challenge continues to be is on the home price side. But yet I don't see any relief in those prices either, because there's such a lack of inventory, such buyer demand, that I don't see home prices falling in any significant way anytime soon.
Well, Art, before one other follow-up question on that is when we talk about inventories, we of course, the headlines will make it seem like, oh my God, every other house is for sale. But when you say we're nearing about 5 months of inventory, what is what we call normal? Like it's a good market to say we have this much inventory on hand, this many months.
Well, historically, the the amount of listings that was considered normal was an amount equal to about 6 months supply based on the current sale rate. Now, in our current environment, as I mentioned earlier, the actual rate of sales is about 30% below normal. So you have to take that number combined with we've got about almost 5 months of supply, but of course that's 5 months of supply based on a depressed sales rate that's 30% below normal. So you put that together, and what's going on there is there's not a lot of competition on the buyer side. In other words, there's a lot of realtors are complaining they're not seeing enough buyers out there checking out, looking at homes. And so as a consequence, that's part of the reason we've got more inventory and why the days on market for that inventory is getting more extended. But see, that's where I see the opportunity, because if you've been waiting as a buyer, now I think it's a great time to go out and look around, because you got sellers who are a little bit more anxious to get their home sold because they've been on the market longer than they expected. Rates, as we've just shown, have improved nicely. And as we're about to talk about, you can then use some tools to get those rates even better to complete a purchase of a home in a way that's going to be affordable for you and give you the opportunity for that home ownership so you can start building wealth.
Do you think the average seller out there is starting to be a little, I don't know if the word nervous is right or not, when you know, in the past, if we roll this back just 6 months to a year ago, and they put a home on the market, let's say the average sell date was, or selling days on the market was, under 30, and now it's well past 30. Are they getting nervous? And this is what is offering the price reductions versus what their list, or excuse me, the I guess the actual selling price versus what they got for it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a normal situation that you're going to find, is that as that days on market gets extended, that average days on market, of course, property type is a factor there. Some, condos typically take longer to sell than single family detached and so forth. But overall, yeah, the kind of the intelligence from the field is that sellers are starting to get a little anxious about the fact that Gee whiz, I thought I priced my home well, and here
Mm.
we are. We're 50 days in. I don't have any offers. So that is causing sellers to be a little bit more nervous about what are they going to have to do to get that home moved. And that's why, again, I say if you're a prospective buyer, there you have less competition out there of other buyers looking for homes. So if you're willing to go out there and take a look, you're going to find some probably sellers who are more receptive to some discussions about what the price is, what can be negotiated with that price, what kind of concessions that you can get. And if you're getting a loan, then of course we urge that you get those concessions in a way that's going to help with your loan terms. And that's what we're going to get into in more detail.
Well, like I said, I'm excited to talk about, or to take notes, if you will, about today's topic, because these examples I believe you have are real live examples, and what people can actually look at. Because I think those people who are maybe sitting on the sideline, I kind of feel like, Art, it's almost like a game of chicken.
Yes.
It's like, who's going to move first, the seller or the buyer? But you don't have to do that using seller concessions. So let's get into it.
Okay. Sounds great. Well, first of all, as Jeff's pulling up this next screen, of course, I've got here my phrase "buy downs are the bomb," and of course, what that really gets into is the concept of seller concessions. And seller concessions are pretty straightforward. You're going to get a concession off the price, or you're going to get a concession in terms of dollars that you can use for closing costs and interest rate buy downs. And I have a saying that Jeff's pulled up here. First, on the buyer side, as to buyers, friends don't let friends offer below list price to purchase a home. And in a similar fashion for sellers, friends don't let friends lower their list price to sell a home. Now, I'm being a little facetious here, obviously, but the point I'm trying to make here is that when we're in an environment like now, I would say, um, if you're a buyer and you're out there looking at homes and you're getting a sense that you have a little bit more leverage, sort of the natural classic reaction to that is to find a home you like. And then when you make an offer, decide you're going to submit an offer at some amount below the list price. You want to get a deal. And my point is, if you're going to get financing to complete that purchase, think about other ways to get that deal and understand how we can help you with that and get that concession in another way, like in dollars, and then help you restructure or structure your loan package so you're going to be able to address your biggest concern, which is rates are too high, or of course the house price you might think is too high, and so forth. In a similar fashion for sellers, yes, I kind of jokingly say friends don't let you lower your list price to sell your home. My real point to that is to understand that as a seller, you're competing against sellers of other existing homes, but you're also competing with builders. And what you would want to understand and grasp is that builders are very, very tuned into using seller concessions to generate sales. They always will focus on what can they do in the offer price or the asking price they have on this newly built home. What can they do to throw some dollars to the buyers to incentivize them to come in and sign a sales contract? Well, almost always it's going to involve incentives that are going to be associated with the loan, paying closing cost, temporary rate buy down, permanent rate buy down. Those are the classic tools that builders use. We don't see sellers doing that in a similar fashion. We would argue that when you first decide to set your list price, consider setting it where you might create an allowance for some concession amount that you're going to be willing to offer, and then use that in the marketing of your listing. Consider if you looked at listing a home and you've decided on a price, but if you maybe add 4% of that price and then you can suddenly offer a 30-year fix at 5%, that might get some attention of some buyers out there. So we're trying to get both the buyer side and the seller side to think creatively beyond just the classic simple buyer, you think you've got an advantage, offer below list price. Seller, you think you've got control of the market, but your home hasn't sold. You just decide to lower your list price a little bit. On both sides, understand there's a better way, and that's what I'm going to illustrate for you right now. So with that, let me go in the first. I'm going to give you 3 different examples. These are buy down situations that we have recently or are currently handling. And so I want to go over these in a little bit of detail to illustrate for you exactly how what I'm describing can help you, particularly if you're a buyer, in negotiating a better deal for that home. So here's the first one.
Hey Art,
Scenario number.
hey
Oh yeah,
Art, I
go
just
ahead,
have a
Jeff.
question. When if I'm a seller, or just in general of anything, when I start lowering my price, does it show a sign of a little bit of desperation?
Well, it can. And that's, again, part of, I think, one of the subtle points of these alternatives that I'm going to talk about is that, yes, I mean, the classic reaction for a seller who's, wringing their hands because they're approaching, 35, 40, 50, 60 days on market and they don't have an offer, they haven't put their house into escrow, is to just react quickly and in a, I think, oversimplified fashion and just lower your price. Well, of course, once that occurs, and if that price reduction is anything near significant, what that can often do is encourage a prospective buyer. Aha, they've already lowered their price. I'm going to see if I can get another, 10, 20, 25 grand even below that because I've seen a little bit of crack in their armor. So, yeah, I think that's another reason why, as a seller, maybe pause. Don't just tell your listing agent, drop it by 25 grand or 20 or whatever the number is. Look at another alternative, maybe using those same dollars in your head that you're going to concede, but offer them in a different way where you can encourage a full price offer. But in return, here's what we'll do to enhance your financing terms.
I like that. All right.
Okay. So with that, we'll go ahead and go into our scenario number one. So let me first tell you sort of the parameters of this deal. Now, this is a deal I handled just a couple of months ago. A realtor had referred a buyer to me. He was already working with a lender for a down payment assistance program. In fact, looking at a loan program through CalHFA, the California Housing Finance Agency. But the prospective buyer, the borrower, was unhappy with the rates he was being quoted. He was actually being quoted rates in the sevens, again, for down payment assistance through CalHFA. Now, when I encountered this buyer and interviewed him, one of the things I learned is he had enough money in his possession, in his savings account, to support a 3.5% down payment on an FHA loan. So the first thing I pointed out to him is you can get a much better rate since you do have enough money for the down payment. So once I explained that to him, then he advised me he wanted to get pre-approved. He was going to make the offer, and he wanted to submit the offer on a single-family residence. It was in Cathedral City, and it was listed for 574 and 574,000, and he wanted to offer 550. That's $24,000 concession he was going to ask for, but again, he was going to ask for it in the price. So, what did I do with that? Well, let me show you. First thing I want to point out is that, let's say I couldn't convince him to do anything different, but just offer the 550. Well, what happens if he offers 550 and he gets an acceptance? Well, his loan amount with 3.5% down and including the upfront FHA mortgage insurance would have been $540,000. Well, at 6%, his principal and interest would be $32,38. So keep that in mind. That's what the kind of terms he'd see on his loan if he had simply offered $24,000 under list price and the seller accepted it, no other concession. Now, here's what I did with that same scenario. What I suggested is offer full list price, $574. Request that $24,000 concession, not in price, but as a seller credit. And then what I pointed out, we would then use that credit toward closing costs and an interest rate buy down. So at a full price offer of 575, his loan, or 574, his loan amount would be 563. Remember earlier it was going to be 540. So at the higher list price, 574, with its 3.5% down payment, his loan amount 563. And of course, I'm showing here a rate of 5.75. The reason I'm showing you that is because we took part of this 24,000 seller credit and we lightly, I'll call it, bought down the note rate from 6 to 5.75. That's actually considered a permanent buy down. So we first took and lowered the rate from 6 to 5.75. So you'd have a 30-year fix at 5.75. We then layered into that a 2-1 temporary buy down. So here's what happens after all that. Now what we have is a first year rate 3.75. The principal and interest 26.10. Remember, at the lower list price offer, it was going to be 32.38. So he's $628 a month less for the first 12 months of this loan versus if he instead got the concession off the price and had to take a market rate at 6%. In the second year, his principal and interest was based on a 4.75% interest rate, where the principal and interest is 29.40. That was still $298 a month less than what his payment would be using the 550 offer price with a market rate loan at 6%. So with those 2 years, 628 saved per month first year, 298 per month second year, those 2 years, the amount of money that was saved was substantially lower than what he was going to pay if he just got his concession in a lower price with that market rate interest rate for the FHA loan. What this proves is a temporary buy down at full list price features superior payment terms over a lower price offer. So again, I had suggested this to this borrower when he came to me unhappy with down payment assistance loan program interest rates. Once I discovered he had the money for a down payment, and then I suggested he make his offer with this kind of structure, he did it. The seller accepted it, and he was tremendously pleased with a much better payment schedule than what he was going to look at with that down payment assistance program with mortgage rates in the sevens. So this was a very good example of a successful strategy that I advised the buyer to consider. He took that advice. He and his agent made the offer based on these terms. They got them accepted, and we closed this transaction just a couple of months ago. So now I'm going to go ahead and Jeff, let me know if you have any questions on that first scenario. Otherwise, I'll jump into the second one. Here is the second one, number 2. And I thought I'd show you this one only because it's an example of a situation where sometimes a seller concession where we get it in a credit to use toward closing costs or rate buy downs can be helpful not just to a first-time home buyer, but even to a retired buyer. So let me give you this example. And this is one we just closed literally less than a month ago. I was approached by a retired borrower, primary residence in Orange County, looking to buy a small condo here in the Palm Springs area to use as a second, or we sometimes call a vacation home. He was planning on putting 25% down, but he was still looking for some relief on the higher rates that second home loans have, because on second home loans now, unlike about 2-3 years ago, the rates on second home loans are at the same level as loans for rental properties. The rate's going to be higher. That didn't used to be the case. Not too many years ago, second home rates were as good as primary home rates, but that changed again by the federal agencies a couple of years ago. Now, the particular house he was looking at listed for $175, so it's a small 1-bedroom, 1-bath condo. And again, in approaching me, said he was looking at making an offer at $168,500 or $6,500 lower. So again, let's first look at what would his terms be if he had made that offer that below list price by $6,500. What kind of payment terms would he be looking at? Well, the loan amount would have been $126,000. That's 75% of $168,500. The rate would be 6.75 again because it's a second home, not a primary residence. A primary residence rate would have been probably 6 3/8 at the time. So its principal and interest at 6 3/4 is $817 a month. So let's look at that as kind of our baseline, what he would have gotten in terms of loan terms if he simply offered $6,500 below list and got that accepted. Well, of course, I suggested another alternative. So here's what we did. Instead, I convinced him to offer the full list price, $175. Request that $6,500 concession he was going to get in price, and instead get it as a seller credit. We were then going to use, and we did use this to create or to use the credit toward a permanent rate buy down. So we first permanently bought down the note rate, and then we again layered into that a temporary buy down and still had a little bit money left over, not a whole lot, a little bit, for closing costs. So here's what happened. At the full list price, the loan amount's higher, not 126, but 131,250. But we were able to bring that note rate down to 6.125 from 6.75. The principal and interest at that note rate, 797. Now, on top of that, we layered in a 2-1 buy down. So his first year rate, 4 and 1/8. That brought down the first year payment to 636. $181 a month less than what he would have been paying if he simply offered 6,500 below list price. Second year rate, 5 and 1/8, again, $714 a month less. I'm sorry, 1714 per month second year, $103 a month less than what his payment would have been if he simply offered 6,500 below list and then got a loan amount of 75% of that. So again, this is another example of where for a retired buyer, not a first-time home buyer looking for rate relief, a retired buyer simply buying a small vacation home here in our local market, where we are able to show how getting that seller credit in dollars would address his biggest concern. Rates are too high. What we were able to do was to give him significant rate relief, both in terms of the note rate for 30 years, as well as for the first 2 years in that temporary buy down. So again, it's another example of how I say a temporary buy down at full list price features superior payment terms over just a lower price offer. So again, this is a good example for the older folks that can still use this same strategy as we encourage first-time home buyers do. So again, we can address your rate concerns, whether you're that first-time buyer, repeat buyer, or retired buyer. These tools are still effective and can be applicable in virtually any situation.
Art, an observation that I'm seeing come to pass here. It's almost like the average seller, the buyer, and not to lump everybody in, but the agent kind of sees that there's only one route. Like they have X number of dollars, that's all they can do, and they can lower the price. That's it. But you look at it and say, wait a second, we have this concession here, and we can use it in many different ways. You use it to do a permanent rate buy down, then a temporary buy down, and then use some of it for their closing costs. I mean, that's genius, where it just seems to change the game for a buyer, and quite frankly, for a seller. They didn't feel like they sold the house at below list price, because when they sell this house, does it show that the 175 is actually the price that they paid for the house?
Yeah, on the MLS system, when the house closes, it's gonna be reported at closing at whatever the closing price was. So in this case, if it was listed for 175 and this buyer did offer the full 175, then on the MLS system, it will show a closed transaction at the 175. Now, there will be a potential for the listing agent to plug into that listing once it's updated to a closed status. There is a section where they can indicate if there were concessions provided to the buyer at that closing price of 175 in this case. So that can be notated in the updated MLS listing when it's changed from an active, or at this point from a pending to a closed sale. But one of the things I would address to folks who think about that is like, well, gee, doesn't that undermine that property as to using it as a comp? In other words, will it bring down, the average value of the homes because it's going to be viewed as not really having sold for 175 but for 168.5? Not really. That 175 price will be the number used for comparable purposes for determining what the market value is. The key is if the concession amount that's noted, if it's within the limits that are established for interested party contributions, 3% if you're putting less than 10% down, 6% if you're putting less than 25% down, 9% if you're putting more than 25% down. If those concessions are within those limits, then that closing price will still be used in terms of comparable analysis for establishing market value on other homes in the neighborhood.
I love it. Well, again, I love the fact that, it's like somebody says, we've all played this game where it said, here's a paper clip. Show me how many ways you can use it. And some people think, well, all I can do is attach it, put it to whole papers together. And you have 50 different ways to use that. So I've got on the screen there. If you have a question or you want to get hold of Art, please do so. You can put your comments in the comment section, and we'll put them to Art. He'd love to answer your questions. With that, I'll just back out again.
Okay, Jeff. Yeah, in fact, I've saved the best one for last. This is scenario number 3. This one was, frankly, quite complicated. It's a new construction transaction, and we had a multitude of factors that we had to work through. And so let me go over the basics of the scenario. It's a little bit complicated. First of all, our buyer, first-time home buyer, non-permanent resident alien status, looking to buy a brand new, newly constructed condo. And this is actually on a condominium development up in Northern California. And the builder was offering a $40,000 credit. And again, I mentioned a builder offered this. So again, this is an example of the builder set a asking price, but automatically included to the buyer, here's a $40,000 incentive we're going to give to you, and then you can decide how to use it. So in this case, the builder offered $40,000 incentive for a condo unit listed at $926,854. Then to add on to that, the borrower's real estate agent, because this builder co-ops with real estate brokers, so the buyer had a real estate agent who registered this buyer at the new home construction sales office. So now that agent gets paid a commission, and this buyer's agent is offering $11,000 toward the buyer's closing costs. So there you can kind of see, well, on the next point here, borrowers putting 5% down, where the payment, or the buyer's putting a 5% down payment, and when that's being done, the total credits from any interested parties, the builder or the real estate agent, cannot exceed 3% of the purchase price. Well, that's only $27,905. Yet I'm confronted with trying to arrange a loan where the builder and the buyer's agent are throwing $51,000 at the buyer to use as an incentive. That greatly exceeds the limit when putting 5% down. Then to add on to that, the borrower is what I call credit score challenged. Her credit score was 680. Not because of any derogatory credit, but because of first-time home buyer, younger borrower, credit history not as deep. And so really that's the primary factor why the credit score wasn't higher. Remember, to get the best deal on a conforming conventional loan, you got to be at 780, not 680. So that has a pretty significant impact on the available rates to this buyer. And then to tie into all that, this buyer was very tight in qualifying on the debt to income ratio. And in fact, we got this loan from a major bank lender who would first looked at this deal, was unwilling to use her bonus income or her restricted stock income because she's only been on the job for 1 year. Well, we kind of dived into that in great detail with one of our lenders and determined we could use that income. And so that's why we got the deal. But we still had a qualifying challenge because of that credit score meant a higher rate that we had to work with. And so we had to figure out, how do we use this full $51,000 of credits come from the builder and the agent? How do we take into account this buyer's credit score means the rate's going to be higher, so we've got to figure out what rate can we get her at so her debt ratio is in line. So we had to kind of work through all of those issues in order to fully use the concessions and make sure we can get this buyer qualified on debt ratio and be able to keep the deal together. So here's what we did. Well, here's the first thing I want to point out, as with the other examples. What if the seller just decided to take $40,000 off the price and lower it to $886,854? Well, if they had done that, and I'll explain why in a minute that didn't happen, the lower price would mean a loan amount of $842, and the rate would be 6 3/8 based on the 680 score. The principal and interest would be $52.53, pretty high amount, right? The real estate agent would still have the $11,000 credit that she can provide to this buyer, and all of that would be used toward the closing costs. So yeah, this is an example of one scenario that could have been used. Take 40 grand off the price, 11,000 credit from the real estate agent toward the buyer's closing costs. That works. That was an option, but it wasn't an option. Here's why. The builder didn't want to lower the price by 40,000. That would have been a factor in that particular condo development if the seller lowered the price by that magnitude when compared to other contracts that are already executed at higher prices. In a couple of cases, they've even closed. You get into that kind of situation with new homes where some of the other buyers notice that one of their other buyers that's going to be their neighbor got a much better deal on price than they did. So the builder almost immediately said, no, we're not going to lower the price by 40 grand. That's not an option. So here's what we did. The first thing I had to do is figure out how we can use that full 40,000 from the seller when we can only use 3% of the price, 27,000 and change. So what I determined is, and I encourage this buyer to instead go to the builder and offer to pay $915,287. So that $915,287 is a lower price, but not by 40,000. It's down by over 20,000. But that is a way to use part of that 40,000 seller concession. So what she did is said, I want to have the price written up at $915,287. Then with that, there was $16,000 seller credit in dollars. That's the rest of the 40,000. Part of it in the price, $915,287. The rest, $16,000 in dollars. That those two numbers equal the 40,000 credit from the seller. And then added to that 16,000 seller credit in dollars was that same 11,000 seller credit, real estate agent credit in dollars. So then what we did is we used the credits toward a permanent rate buy down. We didn't use temporary in this one. Temporary doesn't help this buyer on debt ratio. Remember, temporary buy downs don't help you on qualifying. So in this case, what we did is after we lowered the price from over 926 down to 915, we then structured the seller credit at 16, the real estate agent credit already established at 11, that's 27. So what we did is we used that 27,000 and we used it to permanently buy down the rate. The loan amount at that lower price of $915,287 was $869.5. Notice we were able to lower that that rate from 6 3/8 to 5 5/8. That principal and interest went lower to just barely over 5,000, and that permanent rate buy down at 5 5/8 is what kept this buyer under the max 50% debt ratio. We have this loan approved. It's nearly clear to close. We're going to be able to close it on these terms. So this is a good example of how I had to take multiple parameters, adjust the price, be mindful of a 3% seller concession limit with 5% down, figure out a rate that's going to get this buyer qualified on debt ratio. So what this scenario was a real life example of working through those challenges and coming up with a structure that satisfied all buyers. The builder is very happy they didn't have to lower their price by 40,000. This buyer is very happy at a 680 credit score. She's getting a 30-year fix at 5 5/8, and she even got a little bit of money left over to cover some closing costs. So this is an example of using a permanent rate buy down plus a lower price, provided for us to then use the remaining credits to lower the monthly payment and ensure or assure that the buyer will stay qualified by keeping her debt to income ratio under the 50% cap. So this was a very good outcome where we took essentially a deal that was looked at by a major bank first, who was basically saying this buyer doesn't qualify. We took it over. Number one, we determined we could get the buyer qualified, and then we made sure we structured the loan terms as well as the price terms to take into account the full amount of the credits being offered and then give this buyer a below market rate. So it was a win-win-win for everybody. And again, a perfect example. If you're a prospective buyer thinking about buying, get out there now. These kinds of tools can be used for you to greatly enhance your financing terms. Jeff, back to you.
You know, Art, as I look at these three scenarios you went through, typically when, it feels like when you're going into as a buyer, it's like you as a lender says, well, Jeff, I have some good news and some bad news. Usually the good news is, okay, we got your credit, your loan done. The bad news is it's going to cost you more. You got to have more down payment. It seems like in every one of these situations, you actually save these people money.
That's the idea, and that's my point is that there are so many ways that for buyers that we can greatly enhance their financing terms if they think more creatively beyond just offering something below the asking price. And more importantly, for the selling side, we're really trying to spend a lot of time and effort to educate sellers about it is important to be mindful of the buyers that are out there, what they're dealing with in terms of the prices of the homes, where rates are at, recognizing that that home builder down the street is your competition too, and then take all that and put it into your crystal ball as well as your blender and figure out what can I do to better market my homes vis-a-vis the other existing homes that are for sale all through my neighborhood. What can I do to distinguish my listing, to differentiate my offer for this home in a different way than all the other resale homes do? And if you think more like a home builder, put financing into your list price and into your marketing offers, I think you're going to be more successful getting attracting more buyers and making a deal happen.
Well, it feels like it's as you explain these as well, is it feels like we're getting you're the best rates, and we're also getting better prices, even though it doesn't show on the sale. Like this one, as an example, there was a little bit of a lower price, but the other ones were not. And yet, at the end of the day, I don't know. I'm a homeowner. It's like, hey, what are my monthly payments? We're talking 30 years. Am I going to think, well, if I spend $3,000 or $5,000 more, but my payments are $500 and $800 a month less? To me, that's what makes the difference. And it seems like you did that in every scenario.
I did. And of course, in this last one, part of the reason we adjusted the price is, again, we were trying to figure out how do we utilize all of this concession that's being thrown at this buyer when it exceeds the limit that's allowed for 5% down. And of course, it occurred to me, this is an example where lowering the price is a good option, and it does benefit this buyer. Why? Because a lower price means a lower loan amount. Now, I've said before, lowering your loan amount each $1,000 only lowers your payment by about $6.5 a month. But in this case, for a buyer who's already tight on debt ratio, lowering that price just by 12, 13,000, well, that's about $80 a month there. And then we take the rest of the seller credits and the agent credit in dollars, buy down the rate from 6 3/8 to 5 5/8. That's 7/8 in rate. Now you've you've lowered the payment from that perspective as well. The combination of the lower price, lower loan amount, and the lower rate, put all that together, that's what helped drive the debt ratio down under that 50% to keep the deal together.
Well, I love how you didn't do a temporary rate to buy down, because I think if I'm not mistaken, in the past you said, hey, if it's a temporary rate buy down, they have to qualify for the actual future. In other words, if it's 2 years, they have to say, well, they have to qualify for the rate as if it's not been bought down. But if it's a permanent rate buy down, then because it's going to be for the life of the loan, it changes their debt to income ratio, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that was the problem in this number 3 example. Once we adjusted the price and then we identified we had this $27,000 credit from the builder and the real estate agent, I could have offered her, the note rate at 6 3/8 based on her credit score with, say, a 2-1 buy down or even a 3-2-1 buy down. That didn't work. That wasn't going to work. Why? Because the debt ratio is not going to be calculated on that first year payment and rate. It's got to be qualified or calculated on the note rate at 6 3/8. Well, at 6 3/8 note rate, her debt ratio is over 50%. It didn't work. So I had to say, no, temporary buy down is not the solution, not the benefit here. We have to take the concession dollars, pull the note rate down to that point where, when combined with the lower price and the lower loan amount, they're going to get under 50%. So that's what we had to do. In this case, the permanent rate buy down was really the only option, but frankly, the best option, because it's what kept the deal together and got this buyer to be able to sign a contract and be able to actually complete the purchase.
Well, that's exciting. It's got to be a good feeling when you can take somebody like this who probably 9 out of 10 other lenders would have said, no, we can't do this. And you actually put it together in such a way that it's a win for everyone.
Well, I didn't want to brag too much earlier, but yes, this deal came to us after a major bank who works with the same builder that we do basically turned the deal away and said, we can't help this buyer.
Hmm.
So I took a look at it and said, no, no, I think I can figure this out. It took a while. I had to, get out my abacus and do some number crunching, but finally I came up with something that worked, and thankfully everybody was in agreement on it, and this deal is going to close in less than a month.
That's great. Well, who needs Chat GPT when you have Art Alvarez with Mortgage Works? Art, thank you so much. It was great, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Well, I want to thank all of you for watching and listening to this week's Mortgage Minute. Hope you enjoyed the information regarding the seller concession and closing costs and interest rate buy down scenarios. It's something we do every day. Every day, we'd love to help you with your situation if you're looking to buy a home, or for sellers who are looking for better ways or more creative ways to get your home sold. We're happy to help you as well. So, in the meantime, wishing you have a happy weekend. Enjoy your weekend. Try to stay cool out there. And then we'll see you next week on the next edition of the Mortgage Minute. Again, Art Alvarez with Mortgage Works, where we have the answers and they're on the house. So long. Take care.